Et bonsoir, bonsoir. On est de retour pour le deuxième talk de cette deuxième soirée de la Paris Test Conf. Ce sera un talk en anglais présenté par Étienne et Zlata, qui s'intitule Team Collaboration with Test First Approach. Étienne et Zlata travaillent chez checkout.com. Comme ce talk est en anglais, du coup, je vais les accueillir en anglais. So, hello and welcome, Zlata and Antoine. Etienne, excuse me. Yeah, your mic is muted. Can you unmute yourself? I can't do it for you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for being here with us today. So your talk is titled Team Collaboration with Test First Approach. So I guess it's about TDD.
More or less.
Partially.
Oh, yeah, right. So that's really interesting. So as a reminder, you can ask questions in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation in about, I guess, 40 minutes, something like that, 45 minutes. And Zlata and Etienne, the stage is yours. So here we go.
Thanks. So hello, I'm Etienne Pierrot and I'm a software engineer working at checkout.com. Previously, I worked during 8 years for another fintech called MangoPay. I'm working in software industry since 2004, and I'm passionate about topics like test-driven development, domain-driven design, and I'm also a big fan of functional programming.
Hi, I'm Zlata Stamberg. I'm a senior software engineer in test. During the long time, I used to work in a big Russian company, Gazprom. Then I spent a few years in Estonia and work in the companies with supporting a big traffic. And right now, I'm happy to work here in a checkout. Obviously, the main and most interesting topic for me is the quality and testing, but as well, I'm interested in the big data and machine learning.
So who we are, Checkout.com is an international fintech company which handles almost everything related to online payments. Our company introducing B2B solutions which are used by companies like Samsung, Adidas, Deliveroo, TransferWise, TransferGo, and a lot of other companies. So we have offices all across the world. By the way, we have plenty of open positions on the Checkout website, if you are interested. So how much time usually it takes to deliver feature to QA and QA validate it? This is depend from the team structure, from the team seniority, but as well it depends on how good delivery process is, test quality and team collaboration. In this presentation, we don't want to cover all the potential problems, but share our experience, how we deliver feature in our team. This presentation will be about best practices which help us to become better every day. So we decided to concentrate on the most important problem. So the purpose of this presentation is to give you knowledge which help us to speed up the feedback loop in our team. Also show how QA mindset can be shared with the overall team and prevent situation when QA start to be a bottleneck, and finally show or make microservice testing less challenging.
The first problem which we can actually have, feature misinterpretation. It's not possible to get rid of it completely, but what is important for us is find the way to discover feature misinterpretation as fast as possible. The best tool for it, feedback. Feedback helps us to build meaningful application, to be sure that delivered feature meets product expectation and client expectation. This stimulates people and teams work better. Obviously, it's much easier to work on something what's going to be delivered and used by client within the next week, but it's not always the case. We need to understand that feedback for us, it's not only customer's feedback. If we take a look on it, we will discover that feedback loops just everywhere, and goal for us, use it. The first feedback loop, which we miss on a daily basis and almost doesn't notice it, syntax lighting. It helps us to fix the bugs just on the fly. A little bit more time takes the next feedback loop, compilation. As well the previous one, it helps us to discover mismatching within a few seconds. The next loop can actually help us to discover the functional issues. It is a unit test. The duration of the test run depends from the team, but usually it takes like a few seconds or a few minutes. Usually, tests implemented by developers who are implementing the feature as well. This assessment loop can catch some kind of functional issues, but not misinterpretation. The first loop, which we can actually catch some misinterpretation, is the peer review. This loop much slower. If compilation, for example, takes a few seconds, this loop going to take from us like few hours, sometimes even few days. It's really important stage. Obviously, it would take a time not from like one team members plus few of them, but it's necessary to have it. Do it properly. Spend the time which you required for this. Do not rely on the seniority of other developers, because everybody can do the mistakes. It's not about the trust. We can speed up this process, for example, by replacing this loop by pair programming. Continuous integration as well depend on the team and from the project. These feedback loops can easily take like a few minutes or a few hours. After continuous integration, we would have like QA validation stage. And here is time frame even more blurry and bigger. For some teams, it's going to take like minutes, and for other teams, it's going to take like weeks. Everything depends on the teams and the projects. But obviously, there is a lot of way to reduce this time frame. For example, test automation. Other possible way we're going to discuss in a few slides from now. Loop feedback. Next loop feedback. Next feedback loops based on information which we are going to receive from the production, like logs, metrics, etc. It can easily take like few months from us. For example, you're implementing something what's going to be used in a few months from now. Obviously, you can do like production testing by yourself. You can simulate the load on the system. But when the real client will use your application, you can discover interesting use case which you never thought about before. As well as metrics, consumers' feedback you will get only when the feature going to be used by consumers. This can happen within the next day after deployment or within the year in some cases. All this feedback is important for us. All of them help to build a stable system. All of them takes a different time, but we need to appreciate that we have it. We know that for team health, mental health, it's important to have like consumers' feedback as soon as possible. But if one of the loops is really big, we can't expect like consumers' feedback going to be faster. For example, if QA validation takes a few days, we can't expect that consumers' feedback going to be like few hours. To speed up the process in the end, we need to speed up all the processes before. If we want to speed up all the processes, usually the easiest way is speed up a QA feedback loop. What can we do to make QA feedback loop even more bigger? Have a misinterpretation in our project. In reality, we want to discover the fact that our team's members didn't share the same understanding on a later stage. When developers work in isolation, it starts to be a real huge risk. The first stage where we can actually discover that our understanding of the feature can be different from other team members is QA validation, but this is too late. Solution, we need to bring QA on the earlier stages, for example, unit test validation, review, to make feedback loop smaller. Even if developers work not fully done, QA can start do like test implementation to cover the feature. It means that we will not wait to deliver feature on a QA environment before having like QA feedbacks.
So test first approach. What can help us to make QA feedback loop faster in a test first approach? So test first approach is a way of working when test implementation go ahead of actual feature implementation. Let's take a look of the test-driven development loop. So how works the TDD loop? So first, I start to implement a failing unit test, and not compiling is failing. At this stage, I also can ensure that the problem is not already handled by your application. Sometimes it's happened. Then I implement the feature in the easiest way. Even if the code is horrible, it's not a problem. And finally, we start to refactor, improving code quality, removing duplication, and start to think about the design. And I will repeat this loop until feature is fully done. In each step, developers focus on different aspects. First, developers start to specify the problem. Then, developers focus on the technical problem. And at the end, developers focus on the design. And we iterate each time in this loop. So TDD push developers to seeking more about the problem to solve before jumping to implementation. In my opinion, it's the biggest advantage of TDD, and maybe also the reason why developers could find TDD disturbing and difficult. Developers often feel more comfortable to jump into implementation rather than clearly stating the problem. It should not be like this. Don't you feel weird that being comfortable to implement a solution to a problem that you didn't clearly state? By the way, in science, you don't define what should be a successful experience after you run the experience. TDD also helps you to produce the simple solution as possible. Other developers are tempted to implement elegant solutions that handle more scenarios that the product owner asks. And you can maybe think that's the good things, but in my opinion, it's not. If you didn't write the associated test, you have just produced complexity for a not tested and not documented feature that no one needs. Also, TDD helps you to progress with baby steps. In each loop, you will address a specific problem to solve and progress iteratively, even if you don't know everything about the final solution. Also, it allows developers to have confidence about refactoring and improving design. Very often, when we start to work on a feature, we have in mind a naive design solution that sounds good, but when we start to work on it, but more we progress, more our understanding of the feature is better, and we can change the initial naive design without having fear to break everything. And just a warning, TDD is not a testing strategy, but more a developer discipline. Because at this step, only developer is involved, and maybe developer didn't implement the good test because sometimes there are communication gap and people in the team understand the feature differently. TDD is powerful, but not magic. So we need a glue to ensure shared understanding of the feature.
What actually can solve this problem is acceptance test. Before moving forward to the next step, let's take a look on a testing pyramid and introduce the concept of acceptance test. What acceptance test is? This is the validation of the business logic in some kind of black mode box. Why? To be sure that feature meets expectation, clients, products, and QA. How it looks like? Usually acceptance test is implementation of acceptance criteria. And what is acceptance criteria for us? This is a human readable logic, observable from the client perspective. It can be written in a BDD format, for example. It is a realistic example of specification which we are trying to implement. This acceptance criteria defined long before features start to be implemented. It's discussed with the whole team. Everything should be clarified before we move to the stage of implementation of this feature. This is some kind of definition of done for us. What the difference between the acceptance test and end-to-end test? Acceptance test is end-to-end test for us, but on a microservice level. What the difference between the acceptance test and integration test? Integration test validates the system in a white box mode. Just to summarize, what we are validating on this level? Business logic visible from the client perspective. Validation that we are supporting the expected contract between us and clients, and checking that our system is not crashing when our clients does not respect our contracts. Let's see how acceptance test can nicely be integrated with the TDD loop by adding another loop on the top of it. So instead of starting to write some failing unit test, QA will start to implement failing acceptance test first. It can be a developer, for example, in charge of writing acceptance test if QA didn't have the bandwidth. In this case, QA must review acceptance test written by developer to ensure that they're sharing the same understanding of the feature. The acceptance test will be helpful as an entry point to guide the developers to write the appropriate unit tests. If the feature, for example, really complicated, developer will need to achieve many TDD loops to make pass the acceptance test. It doesn't mean that the entire scope of the acceptance test needs to be implemented in the very beginning. It is iterative process. QA can also add the new acceptance test if, for example, some bugs going to be discovered in a feature branch. The job of developer in this case will make acceptance test pass. This kind of way of working allow us to switch most of the bug management from the Jira to Git. Another big advantages for us in this approach, the bugs is clearly defined. Very often we can have some situation that QA spot some bug, but developers cannot reproduce it. Because when they try it, it works fine. Here is no way the developers can argue with the failing test. We can maybe discuss if, for example, scenario implemented by QA is relevant, but it's not about the reality that some scenario is failing. One important thing for us, we consider that feature is ready to ship to the QA environment only when all acceptance tests passing, and CI should not allow to merge some feature branch if some acceptance test not passing. If you're interested in this acceptance TDD approach, I strongly advise you to check this article of Thomas Pierre about the outside of Daemon TDD. There is as well some talks available.
So let's talk about the life cycle of the feature. I'll start by a meeting or a workshop with PO, QA, and Dev to define acceptance criteria of the feature. Once the criteria are well defined, QA and Dev will start to work on a feature branch. QA will start to translate the acceptance criteria in high-level acceptance tests that know nothing about implementation details, since implementation details is not defined for now. As we said previously, developer can also be involved in this if QA didn't have the boundaries. In this case, QA will just review the acceptance test. Once some acceptance tests are ready, developer will start to implement the feature and make pass the acceptance test. Once all acceptance tests needed to consider the feature done are passing, tests will run on our CI in an environment spawned on a CI agent. It's important to notice that this environment is not fully aligned with the real production environment. First, we use simulator to replace dependency on other microservices, which the tested application rely on. Another point, most of our infrastructure use AWS component, and we use local stack for simulate it. So local stack is a great tool trying to replicate the behavior of AWS, but of course we can have discrepancy between all local stack behave and AWS. At this point, we can have a high level of confidence about the business logic we implement. But we know that we can still have problems related to infrastructure or integration with other microservices. So when the feature is merged on our main branch, we deploy our application in AWS development environment. In this environment, we run acceptance tests with simulator, but with the real AWS infrastructure. At this point, our confidence has improved. We know that our application works perfectly with AWS infrastructure. Still, we can have some problem with integration with other microservices. At this point, we can deploy our application in the AWS QA environment. Here, we will run automated end-to-end tests for checking that the plumbing with other microservices work fine. Here, QA will give an approval to go to production, and we will deploy the application to a staging environment not accessible from the consumer. And we will proceed to some quick manual testing, and finally, we will perform the deployment to production to make the feature available for our consumer.
There are only two things can actually prevent QA from implementing tests before feature implementation. First of all, not clear requirements, but all of you know what to do with this. You need to clarify contract which you are going to test, which you are going to expose before feature implementation start. And second of all, QA cannot run specific version on a local environment. The main rule which you need to discuss with your team, which you need to clarify from the very beginning, every members of your team, as well as QA, should have the possibility to create branch in every moment of the time, run solution on his local environment, and work on a test in isolation if it would be needed. If you don't have it, you're blocked. You need to solve it first. Potential problem which you can have in this stage, for running solution locally, the team members not sharing the same operating system, or your application can be really, really heavy. A lot of services needs to be run in a parallel. Because we are using microservice architecture as a part of our solution, the answer for us, decreasation. We are changing the real dependencies to the fake one. By using containers and Docker Compose, we are running our application by executing only one command. And it would build the same infrastructure on all machines, on the machines of QA and developers. The problem that QA have some bugs which cannot be reproduced by developers would be solved automatically.
So let's talk about end-to-end testing and microservices. So this tweet belonged to a thread of Sam Newman about end-to-end testing and microservices. So Sam Newman is a guy that coined the term of microservices. He also wrote a classic book about it. Here Sam explained one of the complexity brought by microservices. The point that Sam makes is that end-to-end testing of microservices push teams to lose autonomy of deployment. And that's a huge problem because autonomy is the big advantage of doing microservices. So what's the point of doing microservices if at the end you lose deployment autonomy? So microservices is a commonly used solution, and it's really powerful instrument to scale in terms of organization and give autonomy to the team. But there are a price to pay. We can have many things that can make end-to-end testing complicated because first, network and asynchronous process will make the test less predictable. We can have also temporal coupling. For example, what about a process that's spread on many days? We have also a lot of services that integrate between each other. That means that we will have a different combination to cover. Amount of the test will grow quickly, making one slower and probably less predictable on the long run. This will prevent us to go to production, and that will increase the feedback loop, and that's a bad thing. If a feature requires change on many services, we will need to deliver all the services. And so we will need to coordinate deployment of the services that could be managed by different teams and maybe in different locations. And that means that also that each service should be able to work with both versions of other services. This coupling between teams means that we lose one of the big advantages of microservices. As we said, autonomy. Instead of delivering microservices, here we are delivering and testing a distributed monolith, and we lose completely the advantage of working with microservices. So what is the good amount of microservices? My answer will be less as possible. Even if monoliths are not very sexy, monolith can be a good solution as well. It's important to understand that microservices is a very hard topic, and a lot of teams underestimate the complexity behind it. Going to microservices requires a team that have a good understanding of distributed computing, some concepts like idempotency, tracing, logging, messaging, circuit breaker, having a very good CI/CD pipeline, and manage backward compatibility. Sorry. A good approach is to go to monolith microservice ready, a concept coined by Arnaud Lemaire. The main idea is to design your monolith by trying to get the separation between your domain, but just have one delivery that will be easier to deliver and test. It's really easier to fix the design problem inside the monolith rather than inside the distributed architecture. And the good way to go is to start splitting into microservices once you will get a real value, not hypothetical. For example, if a dedicated team will work on this service. Because once the split is done and you have put network between your different domains, it's become complicated to refactor that. So it's easier to work inside the monolith. During this time, the team will learn about the domain with concrete example and use case, and will be able to refine the design easily. As we saw in the previous slide, we can easily have features that spread on many services, and we want to avoid it. So how to find the good separation that will allow us to have features that are hosted in only one service. So domain-driven design to the rescue. So what is DDD? DDD comes from this book written in 2003 by Eric Evans. So the definition of a domain-driven design is a software design approach focusing on modeling software to match a domain according to input from the domain expert. Very complicated definition. So DDD is a very broad topic and covers many things. There are an incredible community contributing on this topic. So some topic addressed by DDD, we have, for example, the ubiquitous language, that's improving the language we use between domain expert and developer. There are also good practices to implement nicely your domain logic inside your code. And also, how to split your domain with this major contribution of Eric Evans called bounded context. So, bounded context is a topic that became very popular with the rise of microservices these last 10 years. We will not have the time in this talk to go through a complex explanation of what is the bounded context, but let's have a quick overview of it. So I put the definition of bounded context here, but let me summarize it. So, bounded context is bounded context is prefer to deal with multiple domains rather than one huge complicated model. For example, each bounded context has its own ubiquitous language. That is a language, as we said, that's shared between developer and a domain expert. Also, domain can be split into subdomains. In general, bounded context match with subdomain, even if it's not 100% accurate. Also, your bounded context should be driven by the communication structure of the organization. So if you want to deep dive on this topic, take a look to the concept of Conway's law that make a relationship between your communication, the structure of your application and the structure of your organization. That is a very interesting law. Also, the boundary of your context are implemented with a set of explicit big contracts. And these contracts, this boundary, it's not necessarily a network boundary. This boundary can be hosted inside the same monolith, but yes. So let's take a look to an example of bounded context. We have here a context about sales and another about support. The interesting thing here is that both contexts rely on the notion of product and customer, but each context has its own definition of what is a customer and a product. About the product, the salesman will need to have the pricing of the product and maybe a commercial description. This kind of thing are maybe not very useful for the support. And about the customer, I strongly doubt that the sales and support will share the same contact information. In most of the case, it will not be the same person that will be in touch for commercial discussion and support discussion. So both contexts have a model about product and consumer, but they have different models for different purposes. Also, maybe this model will be stored in different storage. But guessing what should be inside one model or another, what entity should be duplicated in different models, is not that obvious. For guessing this boundary, it requires discussion with domain expert, discovering feature, using event storming workshop, for example. Also, you need to understand the business organization. You need, for example, also to write some domain-oriented test scenario, and it will require a lot of time. As guessing this boundary is a complicated job, and there are few chances that you are good at your first attempt. It's better to start drawing a boundary inside the monolith rather than go straight to microservices. Here we have two bounded contexts related to our card issuing domain. Here we decide to have a strong boundary and have two different deliverables because we have two different teams that are dedicated to that. So here we have a good reason to host these two domains in different microservices that are managed by different teams in different locations. First, we have the bounded context that manage the lifecycle of payment cards that can be virtual or physical, that allow us to create and revoke cards. Some of these cards are single use. That means that once a payment has been processed on a single use card, we should revoke this card. We have another bounded context that is in charge to authorize payment done in this card. This bounded context needs to be aware about active card information for being able to authorize or decline payments. So this context will need to listen card event to update their card model inside their own DB. In the same way, the card lifecycle will need to be aware of transactions that happen for revoking card when transactions happen on a single-use card. So let's focus on the card lifecycle bounded context. So all the contracts should be documented, versioned, and shared across services that need to integrate with other services. In this example, HTTP API will be documented with the help of OpenAPI, for example, and event with a JSON scheme. These contracts need to be carefully managed and we should avoid to have breaking change. So in each release of the service, we should ensure backward compatibility and deprecated field and manage conduct of the change through another release. So let's imagine that we want to simulate a situation. We have a card which can be used only once, and when we will pay with this card need to be revoked. Instead of simulating end-to-end flow, we're separating transaction logic from card logic. Transaction validation going to be covered on the other service level. On this level, we are concentrating only on the card context. For example, an acceptance test will look like this. Given single use card is created, when transaction is approved, then card is revoked. So here we are able to describe through our public contract a real use case and test the feature with only one application. As we are able to split our system to loosely coupled budget context that can be tested in isolation, that means our feature can be tested in isolation as well. Because a new feature will not spread into multiple budget contexts. We will be able to fully test the feature inside isolated microservices. It allows us to rely less on end-to-end testing and also have feedback on the early stage, on acceptance test level, before deploying on Q environment. As a result, Q environment will be more stable. The idea of Q environment for us is not feature validation, but validation integration between several microservices and validate the contract. This practicing we share with you here, we are using it on the daily basis in our team. It's really helped us to make our delivery faster and smoother. The main bug I discovered even before going to QA environment. To prevent situation where QA start to be a bottleneck, we share responsibility of acceptance test implementation between QA and developer. It makes boundary between the role of QA and developer more blurry. In our company, we don't have position of QA. We name it software developer in test. From the title, you can understand that QA for us is developer. We concentrate on the quality of the product a little bit more than other developer, but he's not the only one in charge of testing. Also, it's important to understand that monolith is not a bad solution. Sometimes it can be much better than microservices. So don't rush to go to microservices. Go for it when you can have real value. Also, introducing acceptance tests in your product help us to validate our feature faster, catch bugs sooner, and move with release to production. And the last but not least, very often managers want to have some KPI for measuring team performance. And the different feedback loop which we introduce in this presentation can be interesting to check. Just take a look how much time each of them takes in your team. Probably you will find a way to improve your delivery just by doing it. This metrics can help to understand where the team is good and where the team is bad. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zlatan and Etienne, for this presentation. So I think we have a few questions, and I have some myself. So we'll start with Arnaud, who is asking us, how do you introduce DDD in an organization that does not implement it at all?
Okay. So I think the first step to for introducing DDD is about discussing about the ubiquitous language. It's a simple thing because here it didn't imply to have technical skills particularly, just about the language. So I think for me the first step to introduce DDD in organization is about starting to study the language and developer and business start to talk the same language. I think it's the first step. Also, yes, for me the first step is the ubiquitous language. After in fact, I think the best way to introduce DDD is also not to speak too much about DDD. It's just make the developer should do the QA and developer should go to the business and start to talk with them.
Okay, it should happen like naturally.
Yes,
yeah.
Maybe we should not speak too much about DDD. I think it's, but it's the main thing about DDD is I think the to go to developer, talk with the business.
Yeah, I mean, it can be scary to say, yeah, we're going to switch to DDD, no, it's better to say, yeah, go to the product, like how our user are using how can we scope our stuff, etc. How can we get context and work in DDD. Okay, thank you. Thomas is asking us, are you applying all these practices in all your squads and teams? So it's more relevant on your special case.
Yeah, I'm going to take it. I'm going to be honest with you, like almost all of them. We're introducing here in the presentation test first approach. It's not always working for us because sometimes we have a huge scope of the work. And I would be honest, sometimes developers creating like unit tests before writing the acceptance tests. But usually we're trying to apply all these approaches on a daily basis, and it's really helped.
Okay, so there is some differences regarding maybe the size of the team, the context, the scope they're working on, etc. It really depends. It's not once and for all solution. It doesn't work for all the squads, all the teams. You may have some to do some tweaks, change some things to make it work better in some squads.
To be honest, I think the best stuff which happened with me that happened in this company because we sharing the tasting mindset with the products, with the developers, and with the QA. When I joined the team was already ready to start do like tasting first approach, and it didn't. I didn't spend a lot of time to move forward with this. We are sharing the same approach across all our companies, across all the countries which we have. We have like a lot of meetings where we're sharing some good practices which we're introducing inside, for example, our team. We check it, we understand this is working. We have like QA meetups, like meetups with the other developers, and we're showing how it's happening in our team, and they're trying to apply it. The main reason that all of this working for us, it's seniority and like seniority of our company, seniority of our teams, and they don't scared about trying. If something works in one team, if they would believe this team, it would work in other team as well.
Also, just add something. It's also important that the developer in the team have good testing skills. So first, in checkout, it's an important criteria of recruitment for the recruitment, and also we do some training, some kata, some workshop to improve the skill of the team.
Okay, yeah. So having developers that know the value of testing, of the quality is really helping, I guess. Okay, thank you. So Daphne is asking kind of the same question, but from a different point of view. How long did it take you to reach this level of maturity? So you said Zlata that it started when you arrived. Is it finished yet or not? I guess
It actually starts from the date first. Obviously, when I joined the team, there was a lot of place for improvement. But even when team just appears, we start this project from like very beginning. They already try to implement something. Obviously, they implementing like unit integration test with acceptance tests. There was some problems, but they already start to introduce this concept, and they search for the good practices in the other teams in our company, like within our company. Even so, to this time, they didn't have a QAs. They just asking other team how to do it better, and until there in the team was like no me, they already trying to do something.
Okay, thank you. Emna is asking us, how do you design your microservice tests? Any special design recommendation to improve the quality of your test and ensure good coverage?
Okay, so on this topic, there are, as we see in the slides, we try to test our microservices most of the time in isolation. We have some end-to-end testing that test all the plumbing, but we don't have a full coverage of end-to-end testing of all of all our microservices. But in microservices, yes, we try to have a test that know less as possible about implementation. So for that, for the developer point of view, we use a lot what we call hexagonal architecture. That's a topic that helps you to have very testable application that you can tweak and modify. For example, you can replace very easily in-memory database by real database. You can replace dependency. It's I think it's important. It's a pattern of architecture that is very useful to have testable application and
isolated. Yeah, to have mockups and stubs and everything to make sure you're only testing your microservice and only your microservice. Okay. Daphne is asking a good question. And in fact, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. So who writes the user acceptance test? Only the QA team. So you said it was the QA team and the dev team, if I remember correctly. How do you work with the product? It's a missing part.
This is the best part of my company. To be honest, like as we mentioned, acceptance test is some kind of implementation of acceptance criteria.
Okay.
And acceptance criteria trying to be introduced to us by the product team when we have like all this like some kind of session when they introducing the feature which needs to be implemented. They already trying to create acceptance criteria to cover this feature. During like refinement meetings, we discussing, we can add like every member of the team can introduce the new acceptance criteria, and to the time when we start to work directly on this ticket, we already have like minimum scope of acceptance criteria which need to be done. Obviously, when we're trying to implement this acceptance criteria, like introduce it on the acceptance test level, there is some new acceptance criteria, acceptance tests can be added. But like minimum scope going to be introduced before we actually bring this ticket to the sprint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
implementation, yeah, sorry. And implementation is shared between developers and QAs. Initially, we're trying to work this way. When QA is implementing the acceptance tests, developers doing everything else. But in reality, we understand that QA start to be a bottleneck, and we do like few trainings. I introduced how we can share like the same rule between like all team members. And right now, they can fire me. They can do acceptance tests by themselves.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this answer. Farah is asking one long question. You have talked about acceptance tests. Did this change push you to make performance and service continuity tests? If yes, how did you handle it? So I guess non-functional tests.
We have non-functional tests as well, like load test in our system. Again, I'm going to be honest with you. We're trying to move forward. Obviously, it's not like everything works completely fine for us. What we're trying to achieve, we're trying to run our performance tests every time when we are deploying something on a QA environment. Even so, if like requirements to our system doesn't change, we wanted to catch situation if, for example, performance start to be like not the best way. If like system changed, we wanted to understand like in this sprint, after introducing this feature, something changed, and it can help us to catch some issues on the earlier stage. We are using K6 mostly for the different
K6.
kind of
Okay.
testing.
So maybe I can add something. Also, we are at the very early stage from our product. The team where we work, we have a product that is very early stage. So for now, performance is not our main
concern.
priority.
Yeah.
We're not concerned is to produce feature and to add value. So we're not going very far for now for what about performance, things like that.
Yeah, yes, it makes sense. It's but it's still a metric to follow when the product reach a certain level of maturity. Like you said, Lata, if you notice a drop in performance, for example, something that needs to be investigated. So Emna is asking if your end-to-end tests are triggered by a CI/CD. Do you have a CI/CD pipeline of microservices?
Yes, we have a CI/CD pipeline, but for the end-to-end test, for now, they are triggered by sending message to Slack. But it's honestly, it will not be something very complicated to add. But for now, we are fine with that. But yes, we can also very easily move automatically trigger the end-to-end test when we deliver to QA. But for now, it's not automated.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it works, why not? It's not a bad implementation. And this is our last question, I think. Farah, how do you handle this change in release management? Is it a source of stress, and how do you manage the linked risk? Okay, so regarding the release management.
Okay, I think I understand the question. It's about what's happened during the process of release.
Yeah, apparently you change your release management, your release system. So how do you handle it? And did it induce some stress on the teams?
In fact, we didn't really change. I'm not sure to understand. Maybe I'm not sure to understand the question. In fact, it's about the production release, or it's about the fact that we change the way we release. We change the way we release.
Farah, if you're here, if Farah is here, maybe she can ask her question again.
Tell how our release processes looks like.
So if it's about production release, we are doing that by production release. Okay, so we are doing that by using a blue-green deployment. But as we say, so we are doing blue-green deployment. It means that okay, we deliver from a staging environment. At some point, when we make some tests, manual testing in the staging environment, and after some point, we switch the blue with the green, and the staging environment that was hidden from the client became public to the client.
Okay.
For being honest, for now, it's not. We have not a big traffic for now. So for now, it's not something that is a complicated point. We still need to handle the data management, things like that, or we manage migration during deployment. That is a complicated topic, but for now, it's we're just doing that by the blue-green deployment. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. If somebody else has a question, now is the time. Can give you a few more minutes if you have any question. 1 minute 30 seconds, something like that. If you have any more question for Etienne and Zlata. I think that's it. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we'll continue right after. So goodbye.
Bye.
See you, bye.
Donc voilà, c'était Etienne et Zlata pour leur talk Team Collaboration with Test First Approach. Donc on va prendre quelques minutes de pause comme tout à l'heure et on revient à 20h pour le talk de Hamza. Hamza qui va nous parler d'un talk sur le RBT, donc Get the Best Out of Your RBT Strategy. RBT qui donc nous parle de Risk-Based Testing. Donc je mets le stream en pause et on se retrouve dans une dizaine de minutes. Merci, à tout à l'heure.